1. I'm 82. The truth about my Amish wedding night was hidden from me for 60 years. The sheet under my knees is cold, though the room is hot enough to make the lamp oil smell sharp, and one horse stamps outside like it knows something I don't. My husband's hand is shaking, so is mine. He says, "Sarah, are you ready?" I don't know what ready means. The quilt has one blue square sewn crooked, and I rub its raised seam while he pulls at the left cuff of his white shirt. Once, twice, again. No one has told me what happens in this room. No one has told him either. That's the thing nobody tells you. The door latch clicks behind us, though neither of us touches it. I remember thinking I must be a bad wife because my whole body goes stiff. No, wait. That thought comes later. In this moment, I'm only trying not to cry, because the lesson inside me says, tears can shame a man on his wedding night. He whispers, "I think this is how." And that sentence follows me for 60 years. What does he think he has to do? What do I believe I can't stop? Why does my sister look away the next morning when she sees how slowly I walk? And why, when I finally learn one plain word at 82, do I sit down beside a grocery store rack of canned peaches? I am 22 in that room. I am 82 when I understand it. Quick pause. My name is Sarah, and this is Rebecca Amish Home. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it lets me keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, what were you taught never to ask? And if you want to go further, a super chat or membership, that's you saying these voices matter. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. What happened was that I carried one rule into that room, though nobody had ever spoken it straight to my face. A wife's body belonged inside the marriage before it belonged to her. We didn't use those words. We used softer ones, church words, words like duty and submission and keeping peace, and they were laid around us the way quilts were laid over winter beds, one layer at a time until you forgot there was air underneath. The ordnung governed what we wore, how we worked, when we gathered, and what questions were safe enough to ask. But this rule lived deeper than paper. I learned it when Aunt Miriam lowered her eyes after a joke from one of the married men. I learned it when Mama closed the pantry door before answering anything about babies. I learned it when the bishop's wife handed me a folded apron and said, "A good woman doesn't stir up trouble." The apron had a rust-colored stain near the pocket. I stared at that stain for years. Nobody said a girl shouldn't know her own body. We just never named any part of it, and by the time I was old enough to wonder, the silence had already taught me shame. At 14, I once asked Mama why married women sometimes cried after weddings. She was slicing apples on the narrow table beneath the yellow flour sack curtains, and the knife stopped halfway through one green slice. She didn't scold me. That would have been easier. She pressed the apple flat with her left hand and said, "Some things become clear when the Lord decides." Then she put the slice into a bowl with a chipped brown rim. I knew not to ask again. That's the thing nobody tells you. Rules don't need voices once they get inside your bones. One look can do the work. One pause can build a wall. And by the autumn of 1964, when Eli asked my father for permission to court me, I was already trained to mistake not knowing for innocence. My older sister, Mary, tried to prepare me 3 weeks before the wedding. She took me behind the wash house after supper, where the wet sheets snapped on the line and the mud sucked at the heels of our black shoes. She said 12 words. I counted them later. Be still, don't shame him, and pray if you feel afraid. 12. For 60 years I remembered 13, but no, it was 12. Mary had been married 5 years, and her youngest boy still slept with one fist tucked beneath his chin. When I asked what she meant, she pulled a wooden clothespin from her apron and turned it between her fingers until one side split. "You'll understand," she said. That was all. Eli had been told even less. His brother Amos had slapped him once on the shoulder near the buggy shed and said, "Don't act like a boy." Two young people were sent into marriage carrying warnings but no knowledge, orders but no map. I trusted Eli because he was gentle in small places where nobody was watching. The first time he walked me home from singing, he moved to the muddy edge of the lane so my shoes could stay on the dry strip. He carved a little bird from a scrap of maple and left one wing thicker than the other because he said, "Perfect things make me nervous." I laughed so hard I snorted, which horrified me and made him smile for the whole walk. He was 23. No, 24. I always get that wrong because his birthday came just before harvest. He liked sorghum on warm bread, hated the squeal of the pump handle, and went quiet whenever his father raised his voice. I loved him. I think I loved him. I don't know if either of us yet knew the difference between love, safety, and being chosen in a world where choices arrived already narrowed. The week before the wedding, women filled my hope chest with things for a life they refused to explain. 2 white nightgowns, 6 dish towels, a packet of lavender soap wrapped in wax paper. Grandmother sewed my initials into the corner of a pillowcase, with blue thread so pale it almost disappeared. Everyone had advice about bread, stains, babies, and obedience. Ruth told me never to salt beans before they softened. Mama said to keep a jar of baking soda near the stove. Mary told me a husband worked better when his home was quiet. Not one woman asked whether I was afraid. Not one told me I could speak if something hurt, or that kindness required listening, even inside marriage. On the afternoon of the wedding, Ruth pinned my covering with a pin bent slightly at the tip and whispered, "The first night passes." I waited for the rest. She kissed my cheek instead. By then, the empty space around the truth had become louder than the church benches scraping the floor. Our room was upstairs in the small house Eli had rented from his uncle, and the third stair from the top usually gave a thin mouse-like squeak. That night, it didn't. I remember that because the silence felt like another person following us. A kerosene lamp burned on the washstand beside a blue enamel pitcher with a white chip at its lip. The mattress was stuffed too full in the middle, making both sides slope toward each other, and the walnut bed frame had a pale scratch shaped like a crooked river. Outside, a harness ring knocked against the fence post whenever the mare moved her head. It was warm for October, but my hands were cold inside the sleeves of my white nightgown. Eli stood near the door in his undershirt, pulling at the seam over his left shoulder, over and over. He didn't look like a husband who knew what came next. He looked like the boy who once apologized to a calf for stepping on its hoof. He crossed the room, then stopped halfway, as if there were a line on the floor only he could see. "Mary told you?" he asked. I shook my head, though that wasn't quite true. Mary had told me to be still. Eli rubbed both palms down the front of his trousers and looked at the lamp instead of me. Amos said it just happens. The mare stamped once outside. I could hear my own breath catching high in my chest, too quick and thin, while the lamp flame leaned toward the glass. "Maybe we should pray," I said. He nodded too fast. We knelt beside the bed, our shoulders almost touching, and he spoke 3 broken lines before losing his place. When we stood, neither of us smiled. His hand found mine. It was damp and warm, and I wanted to comfort him. That's the strange part. I was frightened of what he might do, and sorry that he was frightened too. He kissed my forehead first, then my cheek, then he waited, and for one small second I thought waiting might be enough to save us from what neither of us understood. "Tell me if I'm wrong," he whispered. But how could I tell him? I didn't know what right looked like. His hand moved, and my whole body locked. My toes curled against the rough boards. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth until I tasted iron. "Sarah?" he said. I answered, "I'm fine," because that was the answer I had been trained to give whenever the truth might make a man feel ashamed. What followed was confused, painful, and frightening. Not because Eli wanted cruelty, but because he believed marriage itself was permission, and I believed fear was something a good wife swallowed. I wanted to pull away and reach for him at the same time. He kept asking, "Is this how?" And I kept saying, "I think so." Neither of us knew. Afterward, Eli sat on the edge of the mattress with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards. I stayed beneath the quilt, though the room had gone hotter, and watched a moth bump against the lamp glass again and again. "Did I hurt you?" he asked. My throat closed. I said, "It'll pass." Ruth's words had already become mine. He covered his face with both hands and whispered, "I'm sorry." But neither of us knew what he was sorry for. I noticed a loose blue thread near the crooked quilt square and wound it around my first finger until the tip turned purple. Then I unwound it. Then I did it again. Eli brought me water in the chipped enamel cup, and his hand shook hard enough to tap the rim against my teeth. He wasn't a bad man. I need you to understand that. He was blind in the same dark room. But I was the one whose body carried the lesson into morning. The plain fact is that neither of us understood that closeness could stop the moment one person froze. We had never heard that a wife could say no, that fear mattered, or that pain was a reason to pause instead of proof that a woman needed more faith. Our elders taught marriage as a duty that began with vows and didn't need to be asked for again. At breakfast the next morning, Mary saw me lower myself slowly onto the bench. She looked at my face, then at the bowl of oatmeal between us. A skin had formed across the top because it had sat too long. She slid the sugar jar toward me and said, "It gets easier." That was the whole care offered. No question, no check, no door opened. Eli spent that morning repairing a gate hinge with Amos, who laughed and asked whether he was a man now. Eli's ears turned red. Mine burned from across the yard. I didn't know there were words for what my body had done. I didn't know freezing was a response, or that silence wasn't the same as agreement, or that a person could love someone and still be harmed by what happened between them. Those ideas didn't exist in the world I had been given. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. A cruel man might have made the truth easier to sort. Eli was kind enough to bring me warm bricks for my feet in winter, and ignorant enough to believe my wedding promise answered every question forever. The silence wasn't an accident. Mothers inherited it from mothers. Men inherited it from men. Questions were folded away with the wedding linens and handed to the next girl unopened. Decades later, one counselor would draw a simple line on a sheet of paper and say, "Consent has to be present each time." That one sentence would have changed our whole life. But in 1964, I only knew the grief in my body, and I had no name for it. So I made a life around what I couldn't name. I learned to listen for the floorboard outside our room, the one that clicked like a dry twig beneath Eli's right heel, and I would go still before he opened the door. By the time our first winter came, I could leave my body without moving an inch. I counted the knots in the pine ceiling, 11 above the bed, 3 near the stovepipe, 1 shaped like a little eye. I learned to breathe so quietly my chest barely rose. I would think about bread dough under a damp cloth, or the creek behind Papa's field, or the row of blue jars in Mama's cellar. Anywhere but there. I thought every wife did this. Turns out that was the community's best-selling lie, and nobody even had to print it. In daylight I worked, laughed, and handed Eli his gloves before chores. At night I became very small. Eli and I built routines around the silence because routines can look a lot like peace from the outside. On Saturdays he polished the harness, while I beat rugs over the porch rail. And afterward, we drank coffee from 2 mismatched cups. His with a green stripe, and mine with a hairline crack beneath the handle. He never mocked me. He never raised a hand to me. Sometimes he tucked the blanket around my feet before falling asleep, and I would feel love and fear sitting side by side inside my ribs. That's hard to explain. I loved him, and part of me dreaded the sound of his belt buckle touching the washstand. Both were true. I learned to make excuses that didn't sound like excuses. A headache, a sick child, bread that needed starting before dawn. He learned not to ask why my jaw tightened. We became experts in not knowing what we knew. On the hardest mornings, he left the heel of the bread for me because he knew I liked the crisp edge. I thanked him and meant it. Then I washed our cups beneath water so cold it made my knuckles ache, wondering how care could be real and still fail us so badly. The first woman who almost told me the truth was Ruth, 2 years into my marriage, during a quilting bee at her sister's house. 8 of us sat around a red and white star quilt, our fingers moving in and out of the cloth while rain tapped the tin roof. Ruth pricked her thumb and watched one dark bead of blood rise. She didn't wipe it away. "Does it ever feel?" she began. Mary looked up so fast her thimble dropped into the wooden button bowl. The little metal clink seemed louder than thunder. Ruth finished. "Like too much work?" We all laughed, but nobody's eyes changed. Later, while we rinsed cups at the pump, she touched my wrist and said, "You go far away too?" 5 words. I almost answered. Then the kitchen door opened, and Mary called for more towels. Ruth let go. We never spoke of it again. Leah's story came out in pieces, the way a torn letter might blow across a yard. She was 19 when she married Jacob, a quiet man with one front tooth turned slightly inward. By their 3rd month, she had started sleeping in the pantry after midnight, curled between flour sacks and jars of beans, because she said the stone floor stayed cool against her cheek. Her mother found her there once and told her to pray harder. Leah asked the deacon's wife whether a wife could refuse when she was frightened. The answer was, "Don't feed selfish thoughts." That sentence traveled through the women faster than any confession. After that, nobody asked Leah questions. They brought broth when she was sick and folded baby clothes when she was expecting, but they protected the silence as carefully as they protected the canned peaches from frost. 4 months later, Leah stopped coming to quilting. Years passed in useful things. Babies, wash days, sore knees, jars lined up by season. Eli grew gentler as he grew older, though we still had no language for the wall between us. Then, at 82, I sat in a small counseling room above a pharmacy in town, waiting for a bus that had been canceled because of ice. The counselor, a woman named Denise, had offered me tea in a paper cup printed with tiny purple flowers. On her desk lay a pamphlet about healthy relationships. I picked it up because the corner was bent. Inside was a drawing of 2 circles, each marked choice, with a space between them. Beneath it were 6 words. Consent must be freely given each time. My fingers went numb. The cup slipped and tea ran across my skirt, warm at first, then cold. I read the sentence again, and the room seemed to tilt toward the window. Denise was saying something about towels, but I could hear only the radiator knocking twice, pausing, then knocking once more. My body knew before my mind did. My shoulders drew up, my knees pressed together. I was back in that upstairs room with the crooked blue square beneath my hand, except now I was also an old woman holding a wet pamphlet. I wasn't angry, not then. I was sad in a way that made sound feel far away. Sad for the girl on that bed who thought goodness meant disappearing. Sad for Eli, too, because no one had taught him that love asks and listens. We were both prisoners of the same silence, though my body paid the larger price. That's the thing nobody tells you. Naming the cage doesn't give you back the years. What I grieved most wasn't one night. It was the life we might have had if someone had given us one honest talk before the wedding. One page with plain words. One older couple willing to say that tenderness stops when fear begins. I grieved every time I had gone still, and every time Eli had mistaken stillness for peace. I tried explaining this to a nurse after Denise helped me find more reading. The nurse frowned kindly and said, "But you could have just told him. Just. Such a small word." I looked at the silver watch pinned upside down to her uniform and knew she couldn't see the whole house built around my silence. The Amish world had harmed me, and the outside world wanted the harm translated into choices I'd never been taught I had. I belonged fully to neither place. For a while, that felt lonelier than the secret itself. And still, there are gifts from home I won't pretend were false. I carry the sound of horses before dawn, hooves soft on packed earth while mist hangs low over the pasture fence. I carry bread from the wood oven, the crust singing as it cooled on Mama's scarred table, with butter melting into the first torn piece. And I carry my grandmother's hands in prayer, the knuckles wide from work, one thumbnail split down the middle, her palms resting open, as if she trusted the world enough to stop holding it for 1 minute. Those things are mine. I miss the lantern light in winter windows, and the way 6 women could raise a barn meal before noon without one person giving orders. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. The heart is troublesome that way. It refuses neat shelves. But the harm has a name now, silence dressed up as holiness. 5 words. I can love the bread and reject the rule. I can remember Eli's maple bird, one wing thicker than the other, and still tell the truth about what our ignorance did. Beauty and harm can live in the same house. I know because I swept its floors. I don't spend my last years trying to burn down every memory. I spend them choosing what comes forward. I teach my granddaughters the names of their own feelings. I tell them a closed mouth isn't a yes. I tell my grandsons that gentleness means noticing when someone goes quiet. And sometimes I picture Mama at that apple table, knife stopped in the green slice, and I feel tenderness for the frightened girl she must once have been. She handed me silence, because silence was what she had. I wish she'd found different words, but I no longer picture her as the guard at the door. I picture her standing behind it too, with one hand on the latch and no idea it could open. If you grew up somewhere your own body was kept from you like something dangerous, I see you. If you were taught that being good meant staying quiet while your stomach twisted and your hands went cold, I see you. You survived something, and surviving is enough. You're not broken because it took years to understand what happened. You're not foolish because you loved people who passed harmful rules down to you. You were learning the world from the only people you had, and children believe the maps they're given. That isn't weakness, it's how trust works. And when the map leaves out whole roads, choice, boundaries, the right to stop, you can spend half a life thinking the wall in front of you is the edge of the earth. To the one still inside, your questions don't make you bad. To the one who left, missing home doesn't mean leaving was wrong. To the one thinking about leaving, you don't have to solve your whole life tonight. To the one who's married and only now finding words, your late understanding still counts. To the one who recognized herself a few minutes ago, put both feet on the floor and take one slow breath. I know that shaking feeling. I know the strange grief of looking backward with new eyes. And I know how tempting it is to judge the younger you for not speaking sooner. Don't. She used every tool she had. Wherever you are in this, I see you, and you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. Or tell me the moment you first learned that a rule you'd obeyed wasn't the same thing as truth. There's so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer, one plain word at a time. Subscribe to Rebecca Amish Home if you want to stay for those stories, not because they're easy, but because silence gets weaker each time someone names what happened. And to the members in Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. I'm 82 now, and I can't return that girl's lost years. but I can leave a lamp on for the next one. Your body was always yours.